if you built that for young people who make up 75% of global travelers by 2025, you have a 100 million ARR business just on first principle alone. Don't believe what they say, like see how they actually operate and use the product. And then when you have conviction, take the leap. You need to know that like it's going to be scary. It's going to be hard. But if you give it everything you got and you got a great team around you, people that believe in it, just go do it.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Long Game. My guest today is Bo Abrams, co-founder of Kommu, a home swapping platform that is not like Airbnb. We all know Airbnb is basically like a hotel now, different experience, but same price, and it's not cost effective. And Bo experienced this problem firsthand. So he and his co-founder decided to solve the problem by building a trust-based network for staying at friends' houses or friends of friends. It's a really interesting conversation talking about the difficulties of building a marketplace, starting that chicken and the egg situation of supply and demand when building a startup, about the struggles of raising in today's market that's now not a zero interest rate environment, and about how do you try to find product market fit while also addressing your customers, your demands of your users, and so much more. Hopefully you enjoy this episode, and I will catch you in the next one. Enjoy.
I went to school in Philly, and then I ended up coming back to LA to work in finance. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was like, finance in LA sounds cool, working for an Haverford alum. So I spent a few years in marketing there at a hedge fund called Canyon Partners. Then I went to a startup called Steelhouse, which is an ad tech startup, because I wanted to get more involved. I felt like it was a long ladder to climb to really have an important role at that hedge fund. And in the midst of that too, I actually had a friend, it's a longer story, but she had a disease called cystic fibrosis. And I started a nonprofit for her. And that was where I was really exposed to this venture philanthropy model. It really was where I was like, wow, capital allocated properly can really affect outcomes in a positive way, especially in healthcare. So that's where I was like, you know what? I want to apply to business school. This is a good way for me to get into that venture healthcare space. I quickly realized that there's no way that I'm competing with the doctors and the, PhDs in the venture healthcare world. But that maybe I'd be a decent early stage investor. And so I did not want to lose to the rich kids that I lost to in high school. I transferred to Haverford. It's a long story, but I'm very lucky that it worked out from junior college to Haverford. I was rejected by so many schools that I thought I was a shoo-in for. And so this time I paid all my money for GMAT tutors, business school consultants, like $30K all in, really. I took the GMAT 7 times.
7 times.
And
wow.
Yeah, this is before COVID, by the way. This is, really early 2020 and late 2019. And so I end up applying to my dream schools. I only get into one school that I wasn't really super excited about. No disrespect to Tuck, but I didn't really want to go to the middle of nowhere as a 30-year-old. And then all of a sudden COVID hits and I don't want to leave my family. And so I apply to UCLA round 3. I get some decent money to go, probably because they were freaked out about getting kids into the school at the time. And they're like, Bo's down the street and he's going to a different business school if we don't let him in. And it was actually the same story with my co-founder, Gus, who is now right next to me, but he was also supposed to go to a different business school, also born and raised in LA. And he's like, you till I give him a full ride because he got a perfect score on the GMAT the first time. But again, opposites attract. We're going into business school to get paid to work hard. Let me make that clear. It is not a good idea to go to business school to try to start a company necessarily. But what ended up happening is
poke on that. So you went with the idea of doing more healthcare venture philanthropy, or were you still thinking like, I'm going to go do a startup after this at some point?
So what I thought, the belief that I had, and I guess this speaks more about like who Bo is if I ever felt deep conviction about an idea that I would go forward and try it. And that was because I remember I had an idea for the Peloton before the Peloton came out. And I remember my mom and my sister being like, that's stupid. It was exactly. It was like the next day I go in and I'm at the mall and I see like a little tiny Peloton, booth set up. So first and foremost, clearly John Foley, I think that's his name, former CEO. He had the idea way before I did. But I was like, I don't think my instincts are wrong. Like, I think I know products that people want. And so I thought, okay, when I feel that again, as long as I'm true to myself, I'm going to go do it. I did not go to business school thinking at all that was a good idea. I'm like, I'm in debt. I'm going to business school. I'm going to be in more debt. This is to get paid well to work hard finally,
Yep.
like to get to the six figures and really make it happen. So yeah, I was like, no intention at all.
So you went and you finished. Like, what happens then? How do you end up on this path of starting Kommu?
So it starts before business school. And that is because after all that GMAT, after all that happened, COVID first and foremost hits and like we're in lockdown. And I'm like, I'm not happy that I spent the last year locking myself down, trying to get into business school so that I could travel the world and, be free, but no problem.
Adapt and overcome.
And well, yeah. So I remember I was dating somebody at the time. This is the true story. And I booked a trip to Montana, Whitefish, Montana, because it had kind of opened up. It was spaced out. And 4 nights at a crappy Airbnb in Montana was half my rent for the month in LA. And we couldn't get a rental car. So we used Turo. It was the first time I ever heard of Turo, the peer-to-peer car, sharing platform. And I just remember thinking like, why is it that people can do this with their cars, but I can't do this with my home? And you would say, well, that's Airbnb. But it really kind of dawned upon me. It was like, I started thinking about it. I'm like, well, I can't do it on Airbnb. I'm a renter. And then on top of that, I can't afford Airbnbs now. It used to be like this alternative, cost-effective option. And now I 4 nights and I'm broke. I'm done. And I think that partner at the time realized I was broke and one thing dumped me soon thereafter. But I just was obsessed with thinking through that and being like, man, I wish I could have spent more time in Montana, but I just couldn't. So that's in my mind as I'm going into business school. But again, no intention of pursuing it necessarily. But I go in and meet
so
Gus.
you experienced a problem. Were you thinking like, oh, there might be a solution? Or was it just like, were you identifying as like, this could be a business? Or was it just like, this is a life experience and this was expensive, but like, you're not thinking about it more than that?
Exactly. It's a life experience. If anything, I'm not thinking I definitely, even my like early days of thinking of myself as a VC or exploring that, I was thinking I'm a B2B guy. Like, as I'm researching and learning, I'm like, consumer is just for so many reasons hard. And now to even say like, we're a consumer social marketplace, I'm like, those are 3 things that I would avoid in my life.
Yeah.
And yet I believe wholeheartedly in this, but that's to say like, I was not thinking, let's start a business. Let me explore that. I was just thinking that problem really affected me in my life. And why is that such a problem? It doesn't make much sense. What ended up happening was I go to business school and you're meeting people virtually in various capacities. And I meet my co-founder, Gus, and we become friends. And it was funny because, I didn't know this at the time, but everybody was trying to recruit Gus as some sort of co-founder for a business because he was a full stack engineer from Stanford. So it was like dating. He's like the hottest girl on campus.
Definitely the hottest girl.
Yes. But we both were talking about work before business school. And, no secret to anybody out there, but like business school is not exactly a place where you go and you learn a ton of stuff that you couldn't just go on YouTube and learn right now. It's definitely a place where you go and you socialize, you network, and you make connections, and you travel. And Gus and I are like, wait a second, we both were at remote capable jobs that were paying decently well before the pandemic changed that for 100 million plus people in America. And we're like, why are we in business school to travel if we could have done that before? And we realized, oh, this is like a big, big problem. Like the cost of travel, the sunk cost of your home being empty, and the only options now being expensive short-term rentals and expensive hotels is a big, big problem. And so we started researching together and just now thinking like, okay, well, what are people trying to do about this? And so we came across a website called Home Exchange. Have you heard of Home Exchange?
I have not. I've looked into like different options like this before. I think Trusted Pet Sitter is like
Trusted House Sitters is great. Yeah,
is probably the closest I've come to it. But no, what's Home Exchange?
So Home Exchange it's a European website based in Europe, but they operate in the States too, and they've been around for about I think they're close to 30 years now, and they're a home swapping platform. You can swap homes directly. They have a point system for asynchronous swaps, so like an internal currency. And Gus and I are looking at this and we're like, first and foremost, this website, no offense to Home Exchange, it's not that great. There's not a lot of options. Like the experience isn't that great. It's $300 a year though to join as a subscription fee. But we're like, hang on, they're doing $30 million in ARR per year, and they're targeting 45 to 64-year-old homeowners. And your first thought, and Gus and I are thinking like the same thing at the same time without even saying it, is if you built that for young people who make up 75% of global travelers by 2025, who are not listing on Airbnb because they can't, and you make it a swapping platform, which is actually going to allow them to list and to be able to, extract value from their home, you have 100 million ARR business just on first principle alone. So that was where Gus and I were like, shit, we might have to be true to ourselves here and take a leap, despite this probably being, not the time when you think like I'm going to make money. Being a founder is like the opposite. You work harder than ever to make no money. So that was where it started to percolate in our minds.
And you guys were specifically trying to, like, you bumped into the problem with Montana, but you were specifically trying to say like, hey, where can we travel and just be heads down, but then also offset the cost of our rent? Like, was that the original kind of aha moment? You were trying to solve that problem for yourself, and then you looked to see what was out there, and there was kind of one option?
I think what ended up happening was like, we weren't in, let's call it founder mode, where you're thinking about the problem, as a business opportunity. You're just thinking about the problem so much because you're like, this just seems obviously like something's not working, and it's happening a lot for us, right? Where we're like, there are more trips coming up that we can't take. And you're like, this is just absurd. It was more that I would say in looking at home exchange, that's an incumbent in the market that we thought, with some different branding, with the different targeting of the market, and just, from all the people that we're talking to that have sort of experienced this problem, if you built that for young people and you branded it right, you don't have to make so many, you have to do so much research to get up and going and kind of do that. They've done that and proven it already. Obviously, easier said than done. But we had started a company. Well, yeah, so we had started a company called Swapped, SWAPT, which was a home swapping platform akin to home exchange, but it was just very much the founder painted door technique. So people are like filling out info on a website. Gus and I are then manually facilitating swaps, and we're learning from that experience. But that was where we started when we were like, is there something there? Should we try to really pursue this and build something?
So fast forward to like where you guys are today. I mean, you have a platform. You're also kind of going through some changes, which is natural as a startup. So like, what exactly is Kommu?
Yeah, so Kommu today is a social marketplace that it lets anyone list their home with and through the people they trust on their terms. So that could be swapping, but now it can also be pet sitting. It could be recouping costs. Often people actually use this as a platform to gift their homes to their 10 closest friends. And the idea is, as a host, you can control your privacy, who you want to list to, if you're in various public and private groups on Kommu, that's all at your, discretion. And then as a guest, you're basically seeing listings that are ideally connected to you in some way. And if they're not, people often have their LinkedIn and Instagrams on their profiles still. But you're finding that places in New York are $95 a night, for a beautiful 1-bedroom in an ideal location. It's that there's tons of people that are just finding ways to list that are not for a profit, and they're happy with that. So that is what we facilitate in one centralized platform.
Why is Airbnb so expensive now? I mean, is it actually cheaper than hotels? That was kind of the original premise, but I feel like it's shifted a lot in the past decade plus.
Yeah. Airbnb, first and foremost, I will say, is an amazing company, and I have the utmost respect for that team in so many ways. And I feel for them, but I also don't feel for them because, obviously it's one thing to be the CEO of a $100 billion market cap company and deal with change rather than, a disruptive startup. That's all to say, we think that the change really actually happened because of the pandemic. What ended up happening was Airbnb had a really interesting period where they were in that growth mode and the pandemic hit, and they actually almost went to zero, which is kind of crazy to think. At that stage, they were freaking out, and they did a masterclass, I think, on dealing with that. And then they go public, and going public in some ways was the big mistake, in that the core power user of Airbnb, and, we'll talk about marketplaces, but like the thing that drives Airbnb is obviously the hosts, much like Uber's driven by the drivers.
Supply side versus
and those
side.
hosts. Exactly. And those hosts, they are trying to make as much money as humanly possible. They have properties. they're not their primary homes, right? It really evolved into this idea that like, actually, I don't want a stranger sleeping in my bed. I want a stranger sleeping in a second, a third, a fourth home that I bought. And this is all happening in the ZERP phenomenon, right? Where people are getting all sorts of loans, buying properties in Joshua Tree and wherever else, and listing them on Airbnb to offset those costs and then using them for their leisure when they're not being booked on Airbnb. And unfortunately, that led to, well, unfortunately for us, huge regulations that just doubled down on already what renters like me and Gus were experiencing, but saying like, actually, you need to register these Airbnbs, these short-term rentals in these cities because you're a business. You're commercializing these properties. You're taking up housing supply. You're impacting community.
You're a renter.
And
you're a
Airbnb
short-term renter.
You're exactly.
Landlord,
and Airbnb is beholden in so many ways to those hosts because they're the reasons that there's a giant $100 billion, $10 billion a year revenue business there. And so that is, I think, that inflection point of change was when they went public. It's like your goal now is to grow year after year after year, and you're serving either that core market. And then as you're expanding other maybe products, like they're talking a lot about experiences now, they're not going near the market that we're going into because that brings on much more regulatory scrutiny, and the fines would decimate a company like Airbnb if they even came into the space. And so that was really where we think things got out of hand is when they went public.
So where does you talk about Kommu, you talk about trust being so pivotal, it's generally within your own network. Where does that kind of differentiate you guys of the product, the platform being trust-centric rather than Airbnb is really just kind of alternative hotel options, I guess, right? Short-term stays from landlords in different cities that are unique properties rather than a hotel, which is more standard.
It's a great question that we get asked. It's the first question that basically anybody asks is like, how are you different than this massive incumbent that everybody knows? And you sound very similar, and I totally get it. And so just kind of stepping back, right, to like where we were before as a swapping platform, we had a lot of learnings through that. A couple of things that would come up would be people being like, and that was a members only swapping platform, same business model as home exchange. You're paying a subscription fee, all that jazz. There's a point system. Two things. One was people loved the swap when it worked, right? You're trying to match liquidity. There were some challenges there that we can talk about, but like you're trying to match up dates and you make the swap happen. And like, let's say you, me, Elijah, we met on Swap to do a swap. We are first and foremost asking, how do we trust each other? And like, there are ways to do that, obviously, with verification, with, other means as a platform. And Airbnb does a great job of that, obviously, in terms of like saying, we're the intermediary. We're instilling trust. We've got air cover, all that jazz. But what people often were like focused on was, how do I know any mutual friends with Elijah? Do I have any mutuals that I could go to and actually ask for a review? So there was like, that just kept on coming up. And on top of that, once you and I did a swap, let's call it LA to Philly, we trusted each other. We built that trust. We had a great experience. We saved money. And there was no reason to pay a platform like us, whether it was going to be a subscription fee or even if we could conceive of a booking fee, to do that over and over again, because I've now built that network out. I have my like Philadelphia guy that is also flexible with work. And like, we're just going to do it. We trust each other. And so for us, this was partly what led to that aha moment of the pivot into what we are today. But it was born of sort of seeing like, actually, that model's not going to scale like we wanted to. And that there's a primary behavior going on in the market that we could capitalize on. And that is where Kommu is today. So in that vein, we basically realized like, hey, if we can actually continue to circumvent those ordinances, how would we do that and not be just a swapping platform? Gus and I win the biggest pitch competition at UCLA as we're about to graduate business, and it's with the law school and the business school. We do deep digging on those regulations. And, we reach out to the city of LA, to New York, and they're like, hey, or we say, hey, if we are a home swapping network like Home Exchange, and, we take a small fee for helping people do swap homes and whatever, we're not going to get, or like even a small fee for a booking, right? We're not going to get regulated, right? These are not sublets or anything like that. And the cities were like, 100% you're going to get regulated. If you facilitate that activity and you take a fee for it, most of the ordinances basically come down to that. That is actually what classifies you as commercializing those properties. It's what classifies you as a short-term rental platform. And Gus and I are thinking, we've done a lot of research, and I can tell you right now, there are millions, if not tens of millions of homes being listed in perpetuity on platforms like Facebook Marketplace by millennials and Gen Zers that do nothing else but use Facebook Marketplace, as a platform. They do not use Meta as a social platform. People are posting on Instagram all the time and asking friends about posting on Instagram, and they're often citing that they want a friend of a friend. And there's plenty of other places where we're like, this is just happening, writ large. Why are they not getting regulated? And it's because they're social networks. And that
There's
was
no
this kind of
actual
aha moment for
entity
me,
behind
guys.
it kind of facilitating it. It's just people communicating with other people on a platform, but that platform is not meant for that. Yes?
Right. And it comes to this thing, it's Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which is essentially the bedrock of the internet, which says you as an internet publisher are not responsible for user-generated content unless it violates a federal law. So yes, you cannot build a network for selling drugs on the web.
Violates a
Silk
law.
Road, totally understand. Yeah. But you have a right, obviously, as a user and as a renter and anything else to publish to your network that your home's available, that you're not listing it for profit ideally, but, obviously you're allowed to publish when it's available, who you'd like to list it to. And as long as we don't take a fee for facilitating that, we're actually not violating any of those ordinances. And we thought, okay, what if we just charge a subscription fee for access to those friends of friends, to groups, to people listing all of Kommu? And we start as an open network where people are coming for that tool of booking and listing because they don't want to go on Facebook or just post on Instagram. And then it's really that come for the tool, stay for the network piece of, hey, Elijah, by the way, the more friends you add, the more, friends of friends you get access to as a host or a guest, or the more groups you join. And we're like, if we win that, not only is it the preferred way that people want to travel, it's a preferred experience for both host and guests, because there's that inherent trust of I trust who I know and through who I know. But that ultimately, it's a massive moat, right? That all of a sudden, if I've got Elijah's college friends and his high school friends, his current friends and his people he's worked with, people he trusts, and it's working because we facilitated all those different stays in different ways for Elijah. If a competitor tries to mimic us, it's too late. We've built the platform. So I compare us a lot to LinkedIn in that way. I'm like, we want to be the one source of truth for where you're based, where you're traveling, if you want to share that with your friends, and who you trust to share your home with, all the way up to an open network with no transaction fees and, that trust built into the platform. And you're paying for those added trust features as the network gets wider, right? That's where we're providing $100,000 protection plan, home verification, so on and so forth.
I think it's really interesting that, so obviously every business needs to start with a problem, right? You found a problem, and the problem is that Airbnb is not what it used to be, and it's also extremely expensive, and it's solving a kind of different problem entirely. So you find the problem, and then not only do you kind of start validating it, you also actually go to the root cause to understand, well, why is this alternative? Why is Airbnb so expensive? And again, you're not a direct competitor. You're almost kind of ancillary and solving a different problem. But talking to cities, I think, is actually a really insightful approach for other startups that are potentially looking to disrupt. And the more that you can understand the economics of how there is regulation or how there are fees or how, what are the ramifications of building a particular model at scale, the more that you can understand them ahead of time, you can actually find your unique approach, the annual subscription, rather than taking a marketplace or a brokerage fee. And then you have kind of this unique model that allows you to scale, but you also know once I scale to a larger size, this is not going to become an issue from a regulation perspective unless laws change.
Exactly. And if there were not a regulatory moat in this instance, right, I would think you could talk back to Porter's 5 Forces and be a business school student, which I think is, again, not the advice I would give any founder here, but it's if Airbnb were to see that we were scaling, everything was going great, and we're making tons of money, they would either probably acquire us on that growth and try to take us out of the market, or they would just build it with all the resources they have. And we know from now our investors and advisors at Airbnb or from Airbnb that they wanted to build this, but they realized it would bring on the regulatory scrutiny because the millennials and Gen Z renters would be listing their homes on Airbnb and then sharing those links with friends and so on and so forth. And then it would cannibalize their entire core business model. They do not want you and me, on Airbnb to figure out, wait a second, Elijah, the guy that I'm trying to book in Philadelphia for $140 a night, he knows all my Haverford friends, and I could just ping him directly and he'll give it to me for $100 a night. and he trusts me more because he knows I'm not coming in there and throwing a party because we have mutual friends. And so it was just like all laid out in front of us, is what it felt like. It was like, all right, we know what to do now. We just got to go out and execute on it.
So building a business is a lot of things. Execution is a big piece of it. Where are you guys now? What are some of the most difficult things that you had to overcome or are working on right now with building Kommu?
Yeah, I mean, again, I actually think it's a blessing in disguise, but we graduated business school. Like we were in business school doing, probably way too many business plans and lean validation techniques and things like that. It was ZERP, right? It was a zero interest rate place where founders could have an idea and get $5 million and go try to build it. And you're expected to fail, but like you got $5 million to give a shot and, you live to fight another day. And we thought that was going to be our case too. And the market takes a massive dive in June of 2022. And Gus and I, again, I think we both wish that we didn't believe in the opportunity of Kommu because it'd be a lot easier to be like, let's go get jobs and, figure this out. But we just kept on seeing more and more evidence that we needed to go forward and figure it out. So what we did, we started building, we launched like a public beta in the App Store in January of 2023. Public in that, like, it was really like you needed to be recommended to get in there. But like, we're like, let's just get out there and get the product in people's hands. And we knew to go mobile because millennials and Gen Zers are more and more turning to mobile, even on Airbnb and other platforms. And it's the most valuable real estate in the world, right? If I could ping you and be like, hey, Elijah, did you know 17 more friends of friends just had homes open up in Paris for $80 a night? Like, it's that trigger for aspirational travel, right? So we launched, had some interesting learnings there we could talk more about, but ultimately we just kept on listening to the feedback we were getting and realizing, wait, we're getting feedback. Like, people want this to work, even though it's not like working in the way that it should just yet. And so we launched we really went public like August 2023. So it's been about a year now. And since then, we've had 7,500-ish organic downloads. We have 800 hosts listing all over the world, mostly in LA, New York. We facilitated 3,000 nights booked. We've saved our users and hosts $1 million to date. And even without all the guardrails that we are, putting in place as we speak, we're seeing it work. And we're seeing that people are spending 45 minutes a month on Kommu, like browsing these homes, browsing the trips they could be taking, sharing it with their friends. So like, all things considered, we're really proud of the marketplace that we've built because we've given people that value, because it's our problem too that we're solving for. And it's a big problem that a lot of people are trying to figure out.
In terms of building a marketplace, it's one of the most difficult spaces, I think, for startups is kind of chicken and the egg. You need supply and demand. How have you guys been approaching being able to build both sides of the marketplace at the same time? And I know you're also exploring maybe a couple shifts in the business model or in the approach as well.
Exactly. So marketplaces are hard. And I didn't really realize that. And I think until I started building a marketplace, how difficult it was. You would think like trying to be an AI PhD, specific niche builder would be more difficult, but like arguably there's a lot of aspects of marketplaces, like you said, the cold start problem, that make it insanely difficult, even for what seems like a simple concept. So every marketplace is supposed to start with supply, right? Like you said earlier, Airbnb needs homes, Uber needs cars, because if there's no supply, then you can't build the demand into that, right? The demand needs to go book that supply. And luckily for us, we didn't have to reinvent the wheel because so many people were actively listing in all of these WhatsApp groups that we discovered, Facebook groups. They're listing on Facebook Marketplace, they're posting on Instagrams. And as we put ourselves out there and more people had great experiences with us, we realized actually supply is not that hard to hack. You just basically start to find ways to pull them over. These users are literally paying in some instances $100 a year to be parts of these WhatsApp groups that are terrible UI experiences for home sharing. When they're available, they're terrible experiences for social proofing because like WhatsApp and Facebook are not mechanisms where we actually have social proofing. And so we were like, let's first and foremost try to hack that and like find ways to pull those users over. We have been kicked out of every single one of those groups, but I can assure you there are many, many moles deep in many, many groups that we will never be able to be kicked out of any of them because obviously that's the name of the game.
Yep.
So that was the supply hack. On top of that, we gave people share links for the profiles to be a tool for anybody posting in those groups. So if you had your link to your home in Philadelphia, for instance, and you wanted to share it in this, MBA alumni group in New York, for instance, people could then click that. It would bring them to Kommu, and then they could see more information, like what your Instagram was, what your LinkedIn was, who you might be connected to after they made a profile. Again, that as a host, you don't actually need to list publicly. You can hide that information, but in this case, they're actively turning to those groups. They're trying to solve a booking problem. So that was our hack for supply. That is where we're at right now, obviously, in terms of like now it's matching supply to demand, and how do you match that? And that's a different conversation. And a lot of ways that we're experimenting there. But the pivot that we found was kind of just through a multitude of things, but we think it actually is going to solve for both the supply and the demand issue, because it's going to empower people to actually build their social networks out from the ground up rather than the top down.
Are you able to talk about that yet, or is that not yet?
Yeah, exactly. I am. It's quite literally to say, I know that I just rambled on and on a lot about what Kommu is, and there's another part of Kommu that's almost it's different, but it's similar in that we talked to a lot of founders as we were coming out of business school, and I'm trying to close a pre-seed round, and a lot of these founders are like, Bo, try being a Series A or Series B founder. It's awful right now. Like, we're not going to hit our targets. We're going to go under. And as we dug in more to like where they were having, let's call it cost issues, where they were trying to cut costs, it turns out that that same problem that created Kommu in the first place, that hotels and Airbnbs and short-term rentals were just becoming incredibly expensive and breaking record high average daily rates month over month over month, that was affecting business travel as well. And we thought, wait a second, what if your employees, if they really want to stay with somebody they know and trust, what if they reach out to their friends that they had in these core cities, LA, New York, SF, where your employees are traveling, and they said to those friends, hey, I know you'd probably let me stay here anyways, in your spare room or on your couch or when you're not home, but just so you know, my company pay you $100 a night as a gift if I can crash there instead of $600 a night at the Marriott. Would you be cool if we did that? And it just unlocked a huge opportunity for us, because the companies were like, yeah, we do want to cut our lodging expense, 50%. We do have a lot of employees traveling to those cities. The employees are thinking like, oh, now I see why I want to invite my friends to Kommu and book on Kommu, because like, obviously, like, I can give them a huge gift for them being my friends and for, letting me stay in their home. And then the hosts are like, I'm happy to list my home and, get on to Kommu. And then what we found is if they get to Kommu, they're insanely engaged and retained, like the top of the top. So we're like, oh, we're just finding a cost efficient way. When I say efficient, I mean, we're literally generating revenue by bringing the friends of yours, into Kommu from your companies that you work for, by saving companies money as a distribution, tool, but what could be a business in and of itself because of the scale of how big this problem is. And so that's where we're really leaning in right now. And we just launched our first paid pilot this month.
I think that the, one of the things that I look for in companies, or I've just seen, is making sure that the incentives are strongly aligned. And when you find the true resonance of aligned incentives for all people involved in the transaction, you hit this, product market fit, or you hit this inflection point where just everything just works. And so if you look at the economics per person or all the different people involved in that, the company always wants to save money. It doesn't matter if it's a startup or not. Like, every company wants to save money, right? So if you can lower their cost of their travel for their employees, that's a win. And then for someone who is literally not making money, now they get to make money. So someone that's a friend of yours with their spare bedroom and they just have a friend visit them, like, that's a win, right? They go from not making money to making money and hanging out with their friend. That's great. That's value add, right? So aligned incentives. And then for the traveler themselves, it's a win too. Like, they would possibly even want to stay with their friend regardless, but it could be a better experience than staying at an Airbnb or a hotel. If they still want that, they could have that, but it like aligns incentives for everyone in the value stack. And then that's where you have like this generation of money and value. And I think there's a lot of traction in kind of going after that.
Yeah. And, it really, it just answered a lot of questions that were still outstanding that we believe still to be true, once you get to that point. But obviously, like, there, as you mentioned with marketplaces, like, nobody really wants to come in necessarily and underwrite those early stages of a marketplace of like, hey, we want to see you generate this network effect. We believe you're going to do it. And then go raise a seed in Series A and so on and so forth, because it's hard. Not everybody figures that out. It's a lot of things have to come together simultaneously for that magic moment to happen. And most risk investors are probably waiting and saying, I'd rather pay a premium for when you have that than risk you losing it at these early stages, pre-seed round, let's call it. The B2B2C, it's just like, actually, companies want to save money. That's obvious. It's always true. And it's even more of a problem right now because of how expensive hotels are and because of the downturn we're in. I think, the employees that are choosing to go on these trips, for the most part, they care deeply about these companies. They're not, this is not a model where we're selling directly to, McKinsey or Goldman because, I worked at McKinsey or Goldman Sachs. You better believe I'm staying at the Ritz and I'm getting my points and I'm, doing that. But when I'm trying to close business as a B2B SaaS salesperson in New York and I want to do those trips and I feel that pressure of I got to close another contract to justify this trip. If I have a friend that I love seeing that has a spare room, this is a great opportunity for me to justify that trip and then to go see that person that I care about seeing that I'm not, as close to anymore. And then you're right. It's the gifting aspect of just being able to come in with it's not me that you're charging as a friend, right? It's the company, the man, so to speak, that's paying. And then for us, the business model is actually in this marketplace, we can take a percentage of what's distributed to host because it's not actually tied to the value of a home. It's actually a gift. It's a reward. It's something that you're choosing to do. And then we also cover liability for those stays. So the companies don't need to worry. We're saying, hey, if Elijah's staying with his friend and they're both opting into this and not choosing the hotel, if anything were to happen, if there was any damage because, Bo broke Elijah's Peloton because he's a big dude, we've got it covered.
Yeah.
And we'll also tie to your expense reward system and everything else.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because that's the biggest thing that most companies are initially concerned about, right? They're like, what about liability? What about the worst case scenario? And you do that work and find out, hey, Airbnb does for business too. It's not terribly difficult to, create an insurance product to underwrite those stays.
I think it's cool too. I mean, so the first proper tech startup I started was in San Francisco in 2012. And even then we had employees come out that lived in Alabama and they came out for quarterly all hands or whatever, and they stay with friends. And I forget if we paid them or not, but it was very much a thing. It's very much in the startup culture. I've seen it at many different companies. Also people staying with colleagues, right? So you can even do it within, employees staying with other employees. And it can be like a referral bonus, just like you might have an employee referral bonus. If you say, hey, hire my friend and they take the job, you get $1,000 for, bringing someone in. It's almost the same type of thing where it's like, hey, well, I can bring someone into the network and they can be a place to stay that saves money for the company. I get to stay somewhere. I get to see my friend. It's like win-win-win. It's cool to see. I'm curious to see how your network effect expands over time as you bring on more and more employers that fit within this model.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you mentioned the employers doing this because we've seen it, for instance, Google has a policy similar to this. And there are different ways you can play this policy, right? It could be a 50-50 split between host and employee for choosing, this, and that's still $300 each or whatever it might be, is still great. But Google has this policy where if you stay with a fellow Googler, it is that split model, right? Of both getting rewarded for that. And, in some sense, we are trying to white label that, and there could be the intra-network version of that we help facilitate. But obviously Google has a massive number of employees, they understand and have figured out the liability components of that for them. And what you do end up proving in time, as the network effect takes hold is two things. One is that you can be this one bridge between an employee and their personal network, right? That's not something that you could just get at a Google. It's that actually you prefer to stay with your friend in LA rather than the Googler guy in LA. It's a massive company. The trust is still there, but just because you work at Google, not because you actually have a relationship with that person necessarily. And two, it's really that obviously they do create evangelists for the consumer network and they get exposed to that amazing thing that we believe in there. But at the end of the day, by just showing even bigger and bigger companies as you stack this up and start selling it, that people like Elijah, maybe if he works at a bigger company, are turning to us more as an option because we've built this mechanism to expose them to that, first, instead of the hotel booking system or whatever it might be, that you are going to save them money just by him being on the network, itself and getting all the value out of it as both a consumer and a business person traveling for work.
Shifting back to just entrepreneurship in general, what kind of advice in this non-zero interest rate environment would you have for fellow founders that are maybe starting out or thinking about starting a company or trying to raise? Any thoughts?
I mean, it is harder than I ever could have imagined it to be, but it is the greatest learning experience I've ever had. And I think Gus and I, really are thankful for that. And that, like, the amount of learning that you find in a compressed period of time, like, I feel like I've gained and learned skills that no matter what I do, whether that's Kommu going public, like I imagine it will one day, or if it all went to, crap and I learned all this, I think my life has moved so much faster. My career will move so much faster because of that. So that would, I guess the advice of that would be, go do it. And doing it means, like, go, do all the lean testing, try things out. But then obviously at a certain point, like, put a product in people's hands, see what they do. Don't believe what they say, like, see how they actually operate and like, use the product. And then when you have conviction, that you want to, chase this and go either fundraise or bootstrap, whatever it might be, like, take the leap, when you believe in yourself. Like, if you're hedging it, you might not give it all that you need to do, right? At a certain point, you need to know that, like, it's going to be scary. It's going to be hard. But if you give it everything you got and you got a great team around you, people that believe in it, it's only going to be good, even if it feels like it's not going well at certain times. It's inevitably going to feel that way. Just go do it.
Bo Abrams, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for coming on the show.
Nike, Bo Abrams, Nike. I'm just kidding. Thanks for having me, Elijah. I really enjoyed the call. Yeah, exactly. I'm like, did I just come up with a slogan? Yeah. No, I just ripped off the greatest slogan of all time. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation and the thoughtfulness, and go Birds.
Absolutely. If anyone wants to connect with you, find you online, where should they go?
I would say, you can follow me on Twitter. You can, follow Kommu's Instagram and Twitter accounts are all at GoKommu, GoKommu. But I would also say go download Kommu in the App Store. It's free right now. We're still working on our Android version, but you can message me directly on Kommu. And if you ever need a place to stay in LA, my one bedroom is $70 a night on Kommu, but I also have a dog now, so you can just pet sit for free, and I would take that. So
good,
message me there.
Good deal. I'll have to download and message you soon.
Please. Yeah. Or you can call me, but yes, message me on Kommu.
All right. Sounds good. Bye.
Thanks, Elijah.
If you enjoyed that episode, make sure you check out this video right here. And if you really enjoyed it and you listened to the end, take 2 seconds and share the love so someone else might find it by clicking the thumbs up button and subscribing. I appreciate you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. But click that button.